The wonders of technology. Good morning again. What I want to talk about this morning is slowing down. Slowing down. And I'm going to talk about that as I get into it. I'll talk about that from the perspectives of wisdom and then compassion, and then hoping that some of this lands and you say, okay, that's interesting, so now what? And then sort of practically, so what do we do with that? First though, the problem, right? There is a problem in our lives, which is we are too fast. Stuff happens and we just go do it. And a lot of that action is without us being present. It's thoughtless action. Thoughtless is not even quite right, because we cannot be present with our thoughts either. But it's reactive action. And reactive action, as a general rule, is not going to be skillful action. Reactive action is generally undertaken without reflecting on the deeper consequences for the actor, and without really reflecting on the true nature of what we're reacting to. And a lot of the time we can find ourselves reacting to things where we really don't need to be reacting at all. And it's just the nature of our really fast life. We're caught in this really fast news cycle where stuff pops up on social media and it's like immediately people jump on it. So culturally we are encouraged to just react, and it just gets faster and faster and faster, and the density of stuff in our life gets greater and greater. So we're just overwhelmed with stuff, overwhelmed with noise, overwhelmed with things we need to respond to. And if we allow ourselves to get caught in that, there's no real time to deal with anything. We're just spinning plates and moving on. And because of the things we're not doing, which I just talked about, what we are doing is we are ultimately causing suffering with the way we deal with our lives. We're causing suffering for ourselves and for others. So slowing down, from a wisdom standpoint, there are the two wings of Buddhism, if you will, of the two wings of awakening, are wisdom and compassion. And really they're the same, but they're different faces of the same thing. Nisargadatta, who is one of my favorite great teachers, he famously said, when I know I am nothing, that is wisdom. When I know I am everything, that is compassion. And between these two shores, my life flows. So they're both really important. It's tough to offer true compassion without coming from a place of wisdom. And a place of wisdom that doesn't contain compassion really isn't wisdom at all. But for purposes of this conversation, I'm going to cut them neatly in two with this sword right here, the mandatory sword, and we'll talk about them separately. So the wisdom practice, slowing down, that's what you were doing just now, right? You're just sitting and slowing down, and stuff was coming up, and you were noticing it, and you were letting it go. So the slowing down, you created a space where you could slow down, which is just stopping and sitting. And there's two things that happen when we're in that space of allowing ourselves to slow down. The first is there's just a settling. The slowing down actually does just allow a settling. It's like you put a glass of dirty water on a table. The dirt will eventually settle, and eventually you'll be able to just see through the dirt. So there's this settling that happens. And the second, as the dirt settles, there's a level of clarity, and you can start to see more clearly what's really going on, which isn't what you think it is. And as we settle into that, one of the core Buddhist teachings is the 12-linked chain of causation, dependent origination, which starts with ignorance, and then consciousness arises. Ignorance and then volition arises, and then consciousness, name and form, the 5 sense gates, and contact, and then feeling. So there's this start from just not knowing what's going on. Stuff starts to wake up, and then there's a feeling turn. Something is, we touch it, and it's either with the eyes, the ears, whatever, and it's either pleasant or it's unpleasant. or it's neutral. And neutral means generally we're not really noticing it very much. So it's like embedded ignorance in a lot of this neutral stuff, really, if we're not really noticing. But the positive or the negative, that just continues to spiral into, I want more of that, I don't want that, take it away. And we create these barriers and these boundaries and separation, and it just gets worse. Ajahn Chah talks about the 12-link chain of causation. He says it's very cool to talk about it, but and it's absolutely right. If you can slow down enough, you can see this. He says it's really nice to talk about this, but it's hard to see it, because what happens once that first, so you've got this like shimmering surface of there's no me, there's just this pure awareness. But as soon as there's a fluctuation in that, as soon as something shows up, as soon as there's a spark comes out of that, as soon as something happens within that, there's immediately a diving on. Awareness dives onto this, latches on, and you've got this explosion as stuff is created, as a self and another starts to emerge. Well, the other emerges, the self is kind of this spontaneous thing that just happens, but you've got this other emerges, and this whole story just happens and crash. He said it's like falling out of a tree. You talk about it, and then it happens, and bang, 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 you've broken all the branches, and you hit the ground. It's what just happened. It's really hard to see it, but if we slow down, we can start to see this happening. And we can intercept this. The classic place to intercept it is at that place of feeling tone. So the contact has happened, but before you start to get caught on it, before we start to want stuff and to crave stuff, to notice that there's that feeling tone, there's a sense of liking or disliking, or just not being sure. And that's the place we can typically interrupt this cycle and slow down. And stop, actually. But slowing down allows that to happen. So that's the insight that emerges alongside the calm, and we're settling and we're calming, and things slow down and we can start to see more clearly. Eventually we see we're not what we think we are. Eventually that's what happens, right? So this gets to the other side of it, the compassion side. One of the things that happens, and it happens a lot in this world, quite rightly, there's a lot of energy, a lot of conversation, and a lot of activity about issues of justice, equity, inclusion, because this is a messed up world. There's a lot of unnecessary suffering being caused by ignorance, and I'm going to characterize it as ignorance. I mean, there's prejudice and there's all sorts of stuff that fundamentally all comes out of a place of ignorance. It comes out of people not knowing who they are, what's in their self, what their own best interest. Their own best interest. James Baldwin is the first place I read this. And I'm sure it probably wasn't original to him, but he said of the American system of apartheid, he said of that the people who suffer most aren't the people we think of as the victims of this apartheid system. They're the perpetrators of it. Because to perpetrate this system, you have to dehumanize, which means you're dehumanizing yourself. You're losing your soul, if you will, if you are perpetrating that kind of system. So it's all coming out of ignorance. So in this society, rightly, there's all this activity about equity and justice. But there's a real tendency, and with this culture of social media, instant reaction, there's a culture of, that's wrong, let's jump right on that. And if I don't jump on that, then I'm a bad person, so I've got to jump on it right now. And there's no pause to reflect about it. There's just this jumping into action, which is also being done out of a place of lack of reflection, out of a place of ignorance. So allowing ourselves to get caught into that precipitous action also perpetuates suffering. It's not to say that engaging in the action is wrong. Quite the opposite. Engaging in true compassionate action is the only thing that we really have. But it has to be authentic compassionate action for it to really make us happy, other people happy, for it to be a force for good in the world. So there's a need to really try and slow down in this as well, to not just get caught in the reactive side of it. And as we slow down, So I think of last night driving home a couple of times, you know, the guys, and they happen to both be guys this time, standing on the side of the street with a cardboard sign, right? Homeless, hungry, I don't even remember what the words were, but you just wave them over and talk to them. There are lots of instant solutions to this problem of homelessness and food insecurity and so forth, but the instant solutions don't get to the real root of the suffering. The real root of the suffering, in the first instance, is these are individuals who want to be seen and recognized as human beings. That's the first point, right? So to wave a couple of dollars at them and then wind the window up, really, I've had conversations with people where I know that's actually caused real harm. It's caused people to jump off garage parking lot roofs and kill themselves because it's just so dehumanizing to them. The conversation, letting them know they are seen and they are human, is really what they need in the first instance. But if we get underneath even that, as we slow down enough and we really start to see even more clearly, we see that what they really need is love. What we all need, and love is a word here which we can abuse and misuse, but it really means connection. It really means being together, being separate and yet the same. It's like, you know, the two hands. Yes, there are two hands. I have two hands. But those two hands don't really act separately. The right hand's not going to go do something with it and ignore the left hand. If the left hand's in trouble, it's going to come help. They are so connected that they are the same thing. And at the root of it, that is where our practice of compassion takes us. It's to see that and to truly respond to that, to the deep root of suffering in the world. And yes, you know, people need food. Buddhist monks, they have the four, I forget what they call them, but they're allowed shelter, clothing, food and medicine. The four requisites. You're allowed those four things and that's it. But you are allowed those four things. Because if you don't have those four things in sufficient measure to, you know, basically stay alive, none of the rest works anyway. So you've got to have some basics, right? So yeah, if there's people who are hungry, you feed them. If there's people who are homeless, you give them shelter. But underneath it all, this is the place of the deep suffering. And we only contact this place if we slow down enough to see clearly. As we slow down and see clearly, it's not just we slow down, the world slows down. It's like there's a scene in how many folks have seen The Matrix? Have a bunch of people seen the movie The Matrix? Yeah, enough for it to work. So there's a scene in there where, I seem to remember it being downstairs somewhere towards the end, and Neo gets riddled with bullets and he's lying on the ground and they think he's dead, and then he's reborn. Right. And when he's reborn, he stands up and Mr. Smith and all these other guys come running at him and pummeling him with all their very rapid martial art activity, and he's just standing there. Right. Time is different. Time has completely slowed down for him, maybe even stopped. And that's the lived experience of really slowing down and really connecting with compassion, really connecting with people. Time changes its meaning. And we're just there in that space with suffering. And being in that space with suffering, ironically, is a place of complete joy. Because that itself is relieving the suffering. So this slowing down is being able to slow down is at the root of what makes this practice work, and it's at the root of what can lead us to a happy and meaningful life. And in that place, there are no questions about what I should do with my life. There's just doing it. You don't think. You just, it's not reaction, but it's responding. And it's responding from a place of seeing clearly. So this slowing down is a really beautiful thing that allows us to move towards that place. So, what do? We sit. Sitting is intentional stopping, right? We find a place where we can sit and we can be comfortable for a period of time so that all our sensory inputs slow down. Ideally they stop, at least for a period of time. And in that place, we can slow everything down and we can pay more attention. In that place, we breathe and we notice our breathing. And those of you who've been meditating for a long while will notice when you started breathing, when your rest breath is maybe 8 a minute, 10 a minute, pick a number. But when you start meditating, it settles down maybe 6 or 8, and then it gets down to 5 or 6, and then it's 4 or 5. Everything kind of just slows down, and the breathing slows down. So we learn to breathe. And we learn really that we're not breathing, that there is just breath. But our relationship with that breath changes, and we learn to be in touch with it in a different way. These then become practices that we can take into our life with us. So we get to a place where we don't need a cushion to stop. We can see a red light and we can go. Or we can see something that agitates us and we can feel the rush, we can feel the tightening around the chest and use that to slow down. And we've always got our breath. Staying in touch with our breath and always being able to come back to the breath is always a place to help us slow down. Being able to more fully come into our bodies. This is one other thing we practice on the cushion, or we can practice on the cushion. It's really easy to kind of concentrate on thoughts, but a way of dealing with too much thinking is actually to come into the body. And if we fully come into the body, we can start to realize we can tune into the body in a more subtle way. And we can start to notice that what we're breathing when we're following our breathing, it's not air. Yes, there's air there. But what's really happening is we're moving energy, or we're witness to the moving of energy. We start by moving energy, and then we realize we're the witness to moving of energy. And the energy flows, it's through the whole body, and the whole body is bigger than this sack of skin and bones. We start to notice this whole flow of energy. So being able to tune into that flow of energy, again, it's calming, it's settling. And it's part of the slowing down. I think that's probably enough. So I will stop recording.